The late 90s and early 2000s was undoubtedly the golden age of movie tie-in games. While most of the games get a bad rap, there were gems within the bunch, from Star Wars to 007 and even Spider-Man. But there's none greater than Return of the King. It perfectly encapsulates the movie while also bringing in its own flair that's memorable over 20 years later. And so I'm going to go through every aspect of the game to help us understand exactly why the game is so timeless. I think Return of the King does a great job of applying the setting and tone of the movie to the game. Even though it's an already established world, it's not always easy to bring it from another form of media and have it feel the same, especially when you're dealing with a world of such a large scale like Lord of the Rings. Return of the King is set in the world of Middle-earth, which is full of different kingdoms, diverse landscapes, and distinct cultures. From the Kingdom of Gondor, which is one of the most prominent kingdoms of all of Middle-earth, to Mordor, the Dark Land led by Lord Sauron. Then there's all different races. There's dwarves, men, hobbits, orcs, and others the world brings to life. Each of the diverse races brings a unique history and plays a specific role in the overall story. The different races bring their own unique languages to help reflect different cultures and bring depth to the world. This meticulous world building helps reflect the themes of the story, from the struggle of good and evil, fate versus free will, and the danger of power. There's so much that goes into this world, it would be impossible to bring all that information into an 8-hour video game. Especially in this case, it's the third entry in a trilogy, so a lot of the basic information is expected to be known. Whether you watched the movie that influenced the game, or in this case, read one of those old things called a book that influenced the movie, that influenced the game. Because it's an already established universe like I mentioned, the game chooses to focus on the action experience to build upon the story rather than explaining the story in full detail. Some of the minor storylines and subplots are omitted to streamline the narrative and keep the focus on the gameplay. Think of it as picking up the story at a specific point, assuming you have the general understanding of previous events or the skipped over events. There is enough context given in-game for those who haven't seen it to fill in some of the gaps and follow along, but because of the scale of the world, it's ideal to have a better understanding of Middle-earth as a whole to enjoy the game. If you do understand the basic journey the characters are on, you're able to follow along at these key moments and feel yourself immersed in the moments, which allows the player to focus on what really matters, the gameplay. In Return of the King, gameplay is usually one of the highlights for most players. When people reminisce on the Return of the King game, it's usually, oh, I remember the Black Gate mission, or oh, I had so much fun in the Southern Gate mission. Not because of the impactful cutscenes, but because of how much enjoyment comes from slaying the enemies. The combat actually felt rewarding and allowed us to play all these iconic characters we loved. But what makes the gameplay so memorable? Well, let's talk about it. Return of the King is a hack and slash action game that is played from the third-person perspective. Third person is more important for a game like this because I want to see myself playing as these unique characters. It's not an RPG where I'm playing as myself, so to speak. In total, there's 9 playable characters in the console and PC versions, each with their own unique skills. Each character has a quick attack, which is your basic attack. This was the easiest to spam on most enemies. You have a fierce attack, which is known as the heavy attack. That's the one that usually breaks the shields. In combos, this was a powerful attack that could also dismantle the enemies. You had a range attack, which can vary from Gimli throwing axes, to Legolas using his bow, to Gandalf using his staff to fire magic. They were all accurate to the character, which made them even more enjoyable to use. Then you have a parry, a knockback, a jump back, a devastating attack, which is a charged fierce attack, and a special ability, which is pretty overpowered. I remember spamming the Legolas double arrow attack. That was, some good times. On paper, it seems like, okay, that's every combat system ever though. Every game always says the characters are unique, but then they end up feeling the same. But the reason Return of the King is unique is because all of the characters feel and move different. Aragorn was more of a balanced fighter. Legolas was exceptional at ranged attacks as to be expected, and then someone like Gimli, you could feel the brute force behind his combos and attacks. And not only could you feel it in the gameplay, but you could see it as well. With so many different weapons the characters use, it's impressive just how fluid each of the animations are. Using Legolas, the dual swords are fluid and quick like he should be. But if you are using someone like Gimli, his attacks are strong, but they're really slow. The characters are well represented with their fighting styles, so depending on the playstyle of the player, you can find the character that best fits your play. Now look, that's not to say you can't just break the combat system. Like I said earlier, there were some attacks you could spam that, well, were pretty insane. Pretty much all the Bane attacks were overpowered as it puts you into perfect mode just by using that attack, which I will say, as a kid, I didn't even know they existed, so it's not like this was common knowledge to everybody. Sure, that probably should have been tweaked just to balance the game. Just make the attacks so you don't go right into perfect mode and it probably would have been fine. But if we're trying to compare combat systems based off of how much you can exploit attacks, well, you might be here for a while to find a game that you can't break the system. What's important is to remember how much freedom and creativity you are given while using these different characters. If you want to use a variety of different attacks, you can. And if you want to spam only one attack, you also can. Sure, it can be a lot of the same animations the more you play, but I never found myself getting bored of this combat. I enjoyed the different styles of the different fighters. I think it finds a good balance between playing the game the way you want, while also making it challenging for those who want the challenge. Either way, you can still feel the power and have fun while battling against the enemies, which, in my opinion, is in line with the movie. I mean, Gimli and Legolas were counting kills during some of the most intense battles, so they were for sure having fun, and at the end of the day, any combat system I play, I want it to be exactly that, fun. Outside of the basic combat, Return of the King also uses interactive environments to help push the gameplay along. From throwing spears to dropping fire on enemies, it's a nice way to keep the player on their toes during combat. Even when the elephants are charging, you must use a range attack to help take them down. Now, was it super in-depth where it became a challenge to do these different objectives during the mission? No, not really, but it brought a unique spin to the combat that keeps it fresh and exciting. And it's a part of the story, so leaving it out would also be leaving out exciting moments from the movie. That can also be said about the boss battles in this game. There are a few different boss fights that do a good job capturing the essence of the movie while giving the player a fresh experience. There was no reason for EA to try and recreate what a boss fight should be. Instead, they stuck to the formula that most games use and created fun, unique fights. They weren't extremely long to beat or super challenging, but it was still nice to take a break from the hack and slash and take time to fight in some of these popular moments. Depending on the boss, there were different movesets you'd have to memorize, and some even had different phases. Because of the nature of the story and the fights, they are all unique, whether it's a massive spider or the Witch King or the King of the Dead. The King of the Dead will spawn the dead or blow huge smoke at you that if you don't dodge, you will take massive damage, whereas the Witch King can fly around in the sky. They can be frustrating at times since it can be hard to beat them in solo, but it helps to build out that experience of Return of the King that much more. Now, during the fights, you're continually graded depending on how efficient you are with each kill. There are kill ratings that range from fair, good, excellent, or perfect. So you could say there was a skill gap between how each player kills the enemies. I wouldn't necessarily consider it to be a tough system by any means, but it still forced you as the player to try and be more efficient with your fighting. As you are fighting, there is an on-screen meter which increases as you take down more enemies in rapid succession. So it was nice to see it in real time on screen so you know exactly how close you are to reaching that perfect mode. If you get hit, the meter drops. If you do reach the perfect level, all your attacks increase in strength for a small amount of time. Because of the type of game it is, it wasn't extremely important to be perfect in combat to complete the missions. Even being less efficient, you could still complete the levels, but the main reason you wanted to get more points on the kills is because at the end of each level, these points would be added up as your experience points that would allow you to level up and buy new skills. So the better you do in the missions, the faster you can upgrade your characters and the stronger they'll get. The skill upgrades are split into two sections. There are fellowship upgrades and individual character upgrades. The fellowship upgrades are purchases that go towards every character. It could range from upgrades to the character's health to special combos. Since a lot of the characters use the same combos, it makes more sense to save yourself time and points and spend on the fellowship upgrades. It could be a bit of a risk reward early on because if you withhold from an upgrade, the next mission is that much harder, but with the price differences, it was really a no-brainer overall. Some of the upgrades are not even double the price, yet you get it for a lot more of the characters. So I never really found a reason to purchase the Fellowship upgrades individually. The individual upgrades are the attacks that are more specific to each character, whether it's upgrading Legolas arrows or Gandalf's magic attacks. These are the attacks that separate each character from a basic character to feeling like their own unique one. As you progress through the character's levels, the attacks get stronger until they reach the point where they're just insanely overpowered, which is really fun to play. What makes this whole experience even better is being able to do it with a friend. Return of the King featured co-op gameplay to help battle through the story, and it really seems as if the game was meant to be played in co-op. A lot of the missions felt more complete when having another user by your side. Especially in a time where online play was not very common, playing 2 players through local play was a lot of fun. Pairing up as the iconic characters was an experience only a few games could really match at this time. They also had online co-op for the PlayStation 2 version. I personally never had any experience with this, so I can't really tell you how great it worked. But what was really fun was how rewarding the co-op system was. A lot of games that allow you to play co-op don't add to the experience, it's just kind of there. In Return of the King, it changes the way you look at the missions. My only issue was the camera, because at times if you were off screen, you'll be getting hit and it's kind of annoying when you can't even see the attacks. So you couldn't really stray too far from your partner, you had to stay tethered together. But when you did, you could take down the enemies together and it was a lot of fun. There was also some competitiveness to the co-op system, as the game did track how many kills each player had. So if you could see who the stronger player was, you also got to share lives. So if one person died, then you must both start over, which could lead to some frustration. But at the end of the mission, you share the experience earned to buy the upgrades. I spoke earlier about the Legolas and Gimli kill competition in the movie. I find the co-op system to be built based around that almost. During the fight, you're competitive between who is doing better between the 2 players, but at the end of the day, you both have that common goal of completing the mission to benefit both players. And so it really becomes a competition of who can help beat the mission faster. And this makes sense. I mean, it is the whole purpose of the game, to complete the missions and make your way to the end of the story. Now, I'm not going to give you a summary of the story because, well, if you don't know the story, just go watch the movie. I promise you it's worth it. But there will be some spoilers as I talk about the story and mission design and how it pertains to the game. So the missions are laid out in 3 character paths that follow distinct storylines for different sets of characters that follow the events of the film. We have the path of the king following the big 3, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. This follows their journey towards Mordor to get Frodo time to destroy the ring. Then there's the path of the hobbits, which follows Frodo and Sam's journey to Mount Doom to destroy the ring. Then there's the path of the wizard, which follows Gandalf and everything he does in the war to help Frodo and the others. What I really enjoyed about the different paths in this game is how unique each mission feels, and how unique each path is from the others. Like the movie, we jump back and forth through the different perspectives of the story, and everything about each mission is different, from the scenery to the gameplay and the enemies. Obviously, there are going to be overlaps and similarities as it is the same world, but they differ enough where you don't get the sense it's getting repetitive. And each of the paths brings a different level of intensity, like that of the film. When playing on the path of the hobbits, you'll feel a bit stealthier in your approach. Being that they are hobbits, it's best not to draw attention from the orcs and other enemies. While you're hiding, you get that rush to not be seen or blow your cover. You first stealthily make your way through a besieged city, trying to avoid the gaze between fighting enemies. Then you must make your way over through Shelob's lair, which is a maze with a few paths leading the right direction. This is definitely the most unique level, as it takes place in a spider lair and it's more of a puzzle. It takes using lots of different gameplay mechanics like going invisible or throwing rocks at enemies to complete the mission. Because the hobbits are not supposed to be great in combat, they had to find different ways to make their missions unique in the way combat is approached while staying true to the story. Depending on the difficulty, you could always hack and slash your way through the level, but that's personal preference. In Cirith Ungol, Sam is fighting his way to rescue Frodo, but once again, it's best to stay out of these massive battles. There are still enemies to fight, but the use of the cauldrons to take out hordes saves the player from a massive struggle. Finally is the face-off with Gollum to destroy the ring, which is relatively a boss battle. You just fight off Golem by pushing him off the ledge until finally the ring is destroyed. Personally, it's my least favorite of the paths just because I don't really enjoy playing as Frodo as Sam that much, mainly because I do enjoy the large scale battles the most. I don't mind playing through the missions the first time, but it's just not the ones I find myself replaying a lot, but that's just personal preference. For the Path of the King, it's a lot more straightforward, fighting their way through the different levels to reach their goal. Starting in the mountains, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fight through the dead to gain them as allies for Gondor. As far as the Path of the King goes, the missions inside of the mountains are uniquely different. It's more close quarters, the enemies aren't orcs, and overall, it's not a massive scale battle like some of the other missions. The next mission at the Southern Gate is one of the most memorable missions in the entire game. I mean, I still have the memories imprinted in my brain of just how many enemies I defeated on this level. If you want to kill the most enemies possible, this is the mission for you. Pelennor Fields is the next mission, which is a part of the Southern Gate except it takes place in a more confined space. You must take down the marching elephants while killing the ground troops and shooting down the Witch King when you get the chance. Solo, it could be a handful, but in co-op it wasn't too hard to manage because you could do two things at once. I will say, I always mained Legolas, so anything involving range and using my arrows made my life a lot easier. Gimli users might have had a different feeling about this level. Finishing at the Black Gate, it's another full-scale battle of killing every enemy that makes onto the ruins. It's more of a wave defense mission. It's not extremely accurate to how the movie portrays it, but it has the same sentiment all the same. We're attracting all the enemies to give Frodo time to destroy the ring, so the wave clearing makes sense in this situation. Gandalf's path, the Path of the Wizard, is more about protecting places or certain groups of allies. Starting in the prologue is the Helm's Deep mission, which sees us as playing as Gandalf to drive away the orcs out of Helm's Deep. As it's the prologue, it really was just an entry to show us the game, but it still drives home the point of Gandalf looking to protect these people and places. Then on the road to Isengard, Gandalf is protecting the Ents to allow them to break the dam. As he fights through the level, it's obvious how Gandalf is so much stronger than the enemies he is facing. Then, Gandalf finishes his path in Minas Tirith to help protect Gondor from the enemies breaching the city. The level design is really fun here as you run across the top of the walls. It shows the scale of the battle at hand, especially if you look out over the walls and see all of the enemies marching towards you. The wall is hit with explosions and arrows, and you can really feel the immersion of the battle as if you are Gandalf fighting. Once again, you are still killing enemies, and in Gandalf's case, it is larger hordes than what you will face in the Hobbit's path, but it's still based around other objectives like breaking the dam or helping women to safety. All the different paths are focused on what the characters do best, which allows for immersion into the missions we are playing. They help supplement this with the cutscenes used in the game as well. One of the coolest things about being a movie tie-in game is being able to use clips from the movie as cutscenes to help set up the mission we are diving into. Return of the King, the game, is unique in the fact that the game was released before the movie. So not only did they use movie footage in the game, but you could watch these scenes in a video game a month before it ever hit theaters. Now, look, I know the books came out long before the movie, so you could argue it's not a spoiler, but it's still crazy you could load up a video game and see the biggest plot points spoiled from one of the biggest movies ever. I know they didn't use a lot of the footage in like the back half or towards the end to not spoil it, but it is interesting that they did use a lot of this footage. Now, besides that, I will say a lot of movie tie-in games don't actually use movie footage. I guess because the rights could be so expensive, it made sense for studios to recreate the scenes or just make fresh cutscenes all together. So it is awesome to see how Return of the King can seamlessly switch over from a moment in the movie and have us playing in the mission from that point a few moments later. It nails home the point of why we were playing this game and the stakes of the mission. And you can create the scenes as good as you want, but let's be honest, they will never be the same as the movies. After completing the story mode, there's a few cool bonuses as well, which I think was a nice touch that brought more replayability to the game. There were 2 different bonus levels added after completion. The first is 20 rounds against random enemies that gets harder over time. Then, once you reach level 10 with Gandalf, Sam, and either Aragorn, Legolas, or Gimli, so basically one from each of the story paths, you unlock an even harder 20-round mission involving more enemies. So if you wanted to play the game for more combat but didn't want to go back to complete the missions, you had some fun wave-based combat to complete to level up your characters. I found these to be the most fun because you really got to see how strong these leveled up characters were, and you didn't have to wait around for cutscenes or anything like that. Or you could even just choose some weaker characters and give myself a challenge. On top of the new missions, you could go back and replay the story missions after completion of the final level, but you can now use any character for any mission. So you want to use Sam at the Black Gate? Go for it. Want to use Legolas to travel alongside Frodo? Why not? Bringing that freedom allows for more fun in the missions. With 9 playable characters, you can mix and match a bunch of different ways. For a game that wasn't very long in length, to completion, it was very necessary to have different elements that would entice people to stick around and play the game more. Now, as far as the graphics and audio of the game go, it's hard to really give it a fair assessment. We must keep in mind this game released in 2003, and I'm also talking about the PlayStation 2 version when I talk about these things. I know it released on some other gaming platforms, but PS2 was the original alongside the PC version. It was ported to the other ones later. So as far as the graphics go on PlayStation, I'd say they were pretty good at their time. Now sure, it might have looked like it was 480p if we were to look at it now, but the designs of the character models are commendable for their time. The character models were very detailed and captured the likeness of the film's actors, making the characters feel authentic to the movie. The designs of the clothes and the environments had a level of detail that for the time was impressive. The only part of the visuals that I would say were criticized was the camera placement that I talked about earlier. At times, the camera would switch, making it impossible to see what you're trying to look at. It was pretty annoying at times to be trying to fight enemies just to get confused on where you're even at on the map. As far as the audio goes, it was also extremely detailed. The game featured immersive sound effects from the clash of the swords to the roaring of the enemies to bring a heightened sense of realism to the battles. As the battles got bigger and more enemies joined the fight, the audio would get louder and more intense to match the gameplay. Seems basic now, but once again, this is 2003 we're talking about. Being able to have this type of atmospheric audio helped bring the players deeper into the immersion into the world of Middle-earth. As far as the voice acting goes, well, the star-studded cast of the movie reprised their roles for the game. Well, at least a good chunk of them did. So bringing back the original cast seems like a no-brainer, but it does also contribute to the game's success because it brings together that seamless transition from movie to game. It would be hard to imagine someone else playing Gandalf or Samwise Gamgee. It brings so much authenticity to the game, almost as if it was a co-signed by these actors. Like, hey, we trust the game will be accurate to the movie to the point where we'll be a part of it. So there's really no doubt on why this game is so timeless. When you put together one of the most popular IPs of all time, mixed in with fun gameplay, it makes for an awesome experience. It's so easy to see why everyone loves this game so many years later. There's really not movie tie-in games that were able to do what Return of the King did. Despite being over 20 years old, it still holds the same replayability as it did back then. Now, was the game perfect? Of course not. I'm sure they could have done more with the game given more time and budget, but overall, it did so much right that some of the minor issues were not big problems. Let me know your favorite mission down below, and I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.